All right, shall we kick things off?
Let's do it.
All right, hello and greetings, everyone. Thank you, everyone across the country for joining us today. Welcome to part 4 of our DevOps series discussing SAFe's continuous delivery pipeline. My name is Dalen Walton. I'm an Agile Engagement Manager here at Icon Agility Services, and we're excited to have all of you join us today. Today, we'll be hearing from Dan James and Mark Ricks as they discuss SAFe's continuous delivery pipeline, specifically the release on demand practice domain. In the 3 previous webinars, we've discussed exploration, integration, and deployment, and now we'll be discussing what should happen post-deployment. So I'll tell you a little bit about what we're going to do today. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Icon. I'm going to introduce our panelists, and then we're going to have a 30-minute presentation followed by a 15-minute Q&A. Please use the Q&A function to add your questions as we go along, and then we'll curate and answer those questions live at the end. The session is being recorded, and we'll make the recording available to you after we're done today. And once the webinar is finished and the recording's done, we'll be sending out an email to all the registrants with all 4 recordings of the previous discussions if you haven't caught those yet. So you have all of them easy to reference in one place. So we'll move on a little bit about Icon itself. So what do we do? In short, we're the people. We teach, certify, and coach everything under the SAFe umbrella and have deep experience in all the classes, workshops, and toolkits. Some of the things I'd like to call out is that to date, we've trained over 13,000 folks in SAFe. We've launched over 2,000 Agile release trains, and we've led SAFe implementations at over 100 different companies. So as you can see, we have deep experience not only in the academic and practical aspects of it, but in the implementation and hands-on adoption of these new ways of working as well. Some of the other things I'd like to call out is that our average consultant has over 20 years of practical experience doing these types of things, and we also have not only 5 SPCTs but 2 SAFe fellows. Mark being a SAFe fellow himself, I believe worldwide, I think there's something like, I think they're in the teens maybe. I don't think there's maybe 20 of them in the world right now. So it's always good, time well spent when you can have some time to speak with one of these guys. So as I was saying, we're the people. So even though a lot of DevOps revolves around tools, in our experience, fully 2/3 of the optimizations you can realize in an organization have nothing to do with your tool stack. I think Dan would agree with me that I think in our perspective, an organization that's even 100% manual touch, but with very mature Agile processes, can probably deliver faster than a company with the most expensive leading industry tools, bought with little attention paid to take the steps to improve the quality of their existing processes first. So that's what we're talking about today, not only the theory, but the practical coaching aspects of the continuous delivery pipeline. So why Mark and Dan? Moving on, I won't read their full bios, but the short version is that Mark was responsible for the creation of the SAFe DevOps class itself and a co-author of the SAFe architecture class. So literally, he wrote the book on this. Dan has been spearheading end-to-end transformations for nearly 20 years, and his wealth of practical experience gives you the context behind the theory of what we're going to be talking about today. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to our 2 experts, and please enjoy the presentation.
Yeah, and Dalen, I'm really here as comic relief, to supplement Mark's, expertise. My only contribution to the DevOps course in SAFe is that I wrote some of the exam questions. So if you're flunking some of those questions, it's probably mine.
They can blame you. You're the reason behind it.
Yeah, I'm the reason why they're flunking the exam. So anyway, all right, Mark, take it away.
First of all, Dan is way too modest. He had a big influence on my thinking and big influence on the whole DevOps model and thinking and how it got baked into the scaled Agile framework and our courseware. So if I'm a celebrity here, Dan is just as much of a celebrity because he had a tremendous influence on my thinking out in the field. So cool. Let's get on with it. Here we are, episode 4, right? 4 of 4. We're in the home stretch. So we're here to talk about the continuous delivery pipeline and the DevOps practice domains that fuel that continuous delivery pipeline. So let's get right into it. We've got about 25 minutes to burn. on release on demand. Here we are in the fourth aspect of the continuous delivery pipeline. That fourth aspect contains 4 activities. Those are labeled there in green: release, stabilize, measure, and learn. And we're here to talk about release on demand because we're not finished with the job yet. We went through continuous exploration, continuous integration, and continuous deployment, right? We thought about it, we connected with our customers, we designed it, we built it, we integrated it, we tested it, we deployed it, we made sure that our monitoring stack and recovery capabilities were in place, but we're not live to end users yet. So we're here to really answer the question, what do we do now after we've taken all that time, hopefully not too much time because we're talking continuous and working in small batches, to get that product ready for release. So this whole release on demand aspect has to do with understanding where the value is in what we built, getting it in front of live users, our customers, our end users, and pulling that feedback back from that production environment that fuels that continuous learning loop. So critical last step in the chain that allows this process to fold back on itself.
Yeah, this is the money. This is the money step.
This is where the money is.
And, you know, so the business values of time to market, competitive advantage, product quality feedback are directly addressed by releasing as frequently as possible. And how practical it is, of course, depends on the optimizations in your DevOps pipeline and how seriously you've taken shifting upstream to continuous integration and so forth, as we have covered in the previous 3. So the core coaching question that I would ask here is, how often can we release without inconveniencing our customers? And so there are a lot of sub questions that would follow that as we get into these practices here. You know, like how small can we make each release so we reduce the relearning impact on the, you know, on the customer. You know, we don't want to overwhelm them with too much change too often. You know, can we release with 0 or near 0 downtime and so forth? So there are a lot of little questions that we can ask here. And we call this the money step because it's a business decision to release. It's a technical decision to deploy to production. And if we've decoupled the two, we are going to accumulate technically as much new value as possible. When the business makes the decision that enough new value is pending release, then they can press the button. And hopefully it's just a button press here. And we've eliminated the risk and made it a ho-hum event to go live. You know, hopefully we've even rehearsed this many times before we got here. So
Dan, you've touched on one very critical concept in SAFe, which is separating deployment from release, right?
Yes.
We are deployed to a production environment and we're verified in that environment. We know that we're working and we can release. This is where we actually release. So now we're going live to end users. And to your point, we want to make sure that this is a non-event, right? Yep. No drama, nothing unforeseen, no surprises here in this release step. And it could be as simple as flipping a switch, flipping a toggle. It should be that easy. So if we have that capability, we've separated deployment from release, we've gotten this far, and now a business decision is made according to market timing, right? When is the optimal time to release to our end users because of favorable market conditions, maybe you know, the appetite for our customers to be able to absorb this kind of a change, or maybe in direct relation to what our competitors are doing or not doing, right? But that is all a business decision. Release shouldn't be dictated by IT or the technical team. So we want to make sure that that product is ready to go live when it makes the most business sense to do that. And when that time comes, we want that transition to be easy, seamless, and painless. So we're taking the pain out of release to maximize the business value delivered.
Yeah, and that's how, you know, one of the areas where we want to mitigate our risk in releasing is, number one, through rehearsals earlier in production to make sure that we're stable and you know, we've been able to verify our release candidates. But also here, you know, in addition to releasing new customer functionality, have we also released any new threat model mitigation? Is our security and compliance in shape here? Have we updated that as well to ensure that our new functionality won't be hampered later by rework or security penetration problems? So we want to make sure that our release is complete. We're not just throwing something out the door from functionality perspective. That we're maintaining our continuous security mantra and our continuous quality mantra and so forth.
Exactly. So this release step, just like all of the other steps, intersects these practice domains, right? We've got that practice domain stack in the bullet list over there on the right. So here, when we're releasing, it's, we want the act of releasing to be very simple and quick, but we need to have those capabilities in place, which draws from these practices and the tools that fall into these categories. So we need to make sure that we have continuous monitoring in place, just in case anything goes wrong. A lot of our ability to release quickly and roll back or fix forward if necessary comes from infrastructure management and what we scripted and how we've set up our environments, right? Can we set up and tear down and auto scale where we need to? A lot of that, of course, is in version control, right? We talked about this over and over again through the pipeline. Version control is everywhere because we need the ability to draw from that code base, draw from that mainline or trunk whenever we need to, even if it's in this production environment. And Dan, you mentioned some bits and pieces about continuous security and quality. And back to value stream management, right? What is the process time to get here? How long does it take? What's our process time for actual releasing? Is it a microsecond? Is it a weekend? It should be as quick as possible. And where's the value that we're releasing?
Yeah, and are we employing a selective release here through canary releases or feature toggles? What portion of our actual audience are we going to roll this out to? And are we going to throttle it? Similar to how Facebook does it, where we're going to expose it to 2% of the population and then wait until we see the feedback and then go 100%, or what is the nature of our release? Is it all or nothing? Or are we throttling this out and making sure that our risk is managed here? In the process?
Exactly. So our ability to do that depends on how we've implemented these practices across these domains. Mm-hmm. Cool. Anything else to say about release before we move on to stabilize?
No, I think we're ready to move.
All right.
So we're out the door. Are we done? Not quite.
Let's get back to the backlog.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah.
So stabilize.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. What's the big coaching question here?
How brittle is our system architecture? Are we auto scaling? Are we, is our continuous security monitoring active here? How secure are we? How are we communicating any new vulnerabilities that pop up at this point? How are we handling the new loads on the application and the stack as a result of this release? Does this release strengthen our resiliency of the overall solution, or does it just add new functionality to it? So these are some of the coaching questions that I would care about at this point. And what's our disaster recovery plan here?
Yeah, so we have this stabilize activity in the continuous delivery pipeline after release because it's so important to make sure that not only we've delivered value and we've delivered the product, but we can sustain that value over time. And I think we've all been there where we've released something and it's in use now, but something happens, right? To cause an outage, to cause a disruption of service, maybe a security breach, maybe our infrastructure is overloaded, whatever it is, right? But we know that when our product is in the hands of live users now, whether it's 1 or 1 million or 1 billion, when things happen in production to take this thing out of service, that value starts to degrade very, very quickly. And if we let that continue, then it could damage the relationship we have with our business partners, with our customers, and we get back into conflicts again, and we lose a lot of trust. So this is a very, very important step. We need to make sure that we have the capabilities in place to proactively detect issues before they become customer-facing issues, be able to avoid outages, detect thresholds that may be creeping up toward red line territory, and to make sure that we have a nice, stable, resilient, secure platform that continues to deliver the services and the value that our businesses and end users need. It's a very critical step here.
Yeah, so this is where your site resiliency engineering can come into play. It's actually being employed now. How fault tolerant are we? We're looking at do we have self-healing capabilities for certain problems that may occur? Which goes to our resiliency and the flexibility of our stack. So all these are important things. Now, if we do not have a brittle system, if we are resilient, and if we have these other capabilities in place, there's very little to do in this step. That's a rare occasion that we have nothing to do here, but that's a good thing. That means we've done our job upstream before we got here, and we're ready for this release.
Exactly. We've got to be ready to react. We've got to be ready to get in front of any issues that crop up. And over there on the right, on the practice domain stack, I'm going to go to value stream management there first, because there's one very key metric that is all important in DevOps, and some would say is the most important metric in DevOps, and that's mean time to restore or mean time to resolve, right?
Right.
We know that if we can't do that, we can't sustain value. And oftentimes our DevOps maturity is measured by our mean time to restore. So this is where that comes into play. All of the other practices there and tools that support those practices in the stack are there to help manage MTTR, reduce that down as low as it can go so that any blips in this part of the process are not felt.
Yep. There are quite a few clients that I've observed in the past few years that they aren't even measuring their MTTR. It's just whatever it is, and they're not really tracking it as a key maturity index of their DevOps process. And I like to emphasize how important it really is as the key metric for DevOps maturity.
Perfect. What else on stabilize here?
Well, go ahead.
Yeah, we could talk for days about this, and books have been written about how you stabilize environments. You mentioned site reliability engineering. We talked about chaos engineering back in the response step, right? So this is just being ready to react to issues that occur in production, and the more that we can rehearse those, the better. The more we can have plans and procedures in place to handle these kinds of situations. This traces back to disaster recovery scenarios and that kind of infrastructure with a modern take on managing the stability and resiliency of our production systems.
Yeah, it's kind of like the difference between in professional baseball, where you're going to have our production team that goes out and plays the game, but we have a practice team that does all the rehearsals before the game. It needs to be the same team rehearsing the release and ensuring our stability. It should not be two separate teams doing this.
Right. And, I don't know how much you see this in the field, Dan, but, academically, I see that there's a lot of shifting right that happens in this domain, right? We have a lot of development teams and developers that were involved in early stages of the pipeline being more and more involved in this stabilize step. As they get the pagers, they're responsible for managing quality in that production environment. So we're seeing more collaboration, more cross-functional handling of issues in this step.
Yeah, and teams should not be siloed to the point where they are only responsible for the code that they wrote. They should be responsible for the quality of the code, the automation, the testing, the flow through the pipeline. They should actually own the pipeline that their code flows through. And that includes warranting it all the way to this step.
Perfect. Great. Okay, all important stabilize step. That's the 411. How about we move on to measure?
Okay. So 2 questions that we ask here. One is, where is the value? Assuming we know the answer to that question. The second important question is, how transparent are we about the value of this release? If we've done our job well, and we have provided the proper telemetry and built that telemetry into this release, both in the stack and in the application, then we should be able to answer the value questions here and know from both a quantitative and qualitative perspective what those measurements are. And this is where the leading indicators that we wrote all the way back around at the 12 to 1 o'clock position in the hypothesis, where we had leading indicators. This is where we're measuring and gathering the data to represent, how well we're meeting those leading indicators. Are we gathering the proper data? Are we gathering sufficient data so we know when to pivot or persevere on our hypothesis and, on the epic that this is a part of?
Right.
There are many other questions that are more technical, but we'll come to them here in a minute.
Yeah, so I love this step because it forces us to go after the data, right? Back in the hypothesize step, that very first step in the process, hey, we've got this crazy business idea, we think it'll work. We don't know because we've never built this thing before, but we have a gut feeling about this, right? And we've gathered some data to provide evidence that if we build it, they will come, or if we build this thing, it will be good for the company. But now we have to go prove it, right? Because everything is a hypothesis based on leap of faith assumptions if we haven't done it before. So that's why we start with a hypothesis, but because it's a hypothesis, we need to test it, right? This is the big validation step. To me, this is the real show me the money step. Let's prove it. Is the value there? Is it not there? Let's be measuring the right things, right? So back in continuous exploration, through that agile product management domain, we should have the right metrics defined. These should be leading indicators, lagging indicators when necessary. We should be avoiding vanity metrics. Let's connect with our customers. Let's understand what kind of performance we need from our systems, but let's also understand the kind of telemetry that we need to build into the applications to get that business data that we need to evaluate the value here. So here we're going to measure that stuff against that original hypothesis. We're going to take quantitative data, qualitative data, we're going to mash it together, and we're going to produce a story about how well we did. And that's going to help us with the next step.
That's right. So we just released some new functionality. Are the customers calling us? Are the customer service calls increasing or decreasing at this point as a result of the release? Or are we having to grep through log files to find out the good and the bad about this new release? So, where the value is where the data is, and how easy have we made it to gain the insight that we need in order to make the right business decision based on the result of this release? Can we correlate our customer service calls directly to this release? Or is it to something else? We need to know how to answer that question so that we know how best to satisfy and delight the customer here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'll go back down to value stream management. I'll start there with this one because this is all about metrics. This is all about how we're measuring and monitoring and managing value through that end-to-end pipeline. So here, this is another way to characterize this step is really it's the measure part of the build, measure, learn cycle. So if you're a fan of the lean startup methodology, plan, do, check, adjust. If you're agile, if you're DevOps, if you like to work fast, if you subscribe to lean thinking and that's your daily jam, you're thinking in those terms, right? We're building, measuring, and learning. Well, we can't learn without measuring. So this is the all important measure step. Also, I'm seeing growing complexity in this measure step as more metrics are being defined. People are getting more mature about the metrics that they define. And companies like Netflix, I always seem to go back to Netflix and their billion or so metrics that they track on a regular basis. Not that they make all of their decisions based on data, but that data helps to inform their gut instincts, right? The final decision is always a human decision, but is backed up by data. But now there's more and more data, mountains and mountains of data, and we're storing this stuff. And so the infrastructure to support all of this telemetry, all of this data, and all of these logs is getting more complex, in my view. Dan, are you seeing that too?
Yes, I am. In fact, that tends to be a chill on investment in infrastructure. It's because they realize that if they're truly going to be competitive with their product, they need to gather more and more data. And sometimes they resist investing in that infrastructure because it's not cheap. If it were cheap, everybody would do it. But it's so important because, hey, if we're not in business to compete and to win And to gain market share, why are we in business? And so sometimes this level of investment out here in the release environment is important because we cannot improve what we cannot measure. And we don't want to wait until now before we actually know something. We want to have built in what we believe we are going to need to know up front, so that when we get here, we're simply collecting the data, and now we can make rational business and strategic decisions.
Right. And sometimes the machines are making those rational decisions for us,
Exactly.
right? I'm seeing more and more AI and machine learning, AI ops, big data, predictive analytics, algorithms starting to drive the collection and the crunching of this data, and not only providing those insights back, but providing scenarios and providing some predictions about where the value is going to be if we continue on these trajectories or if we make certain tweaks. So really interesting developments in this measure step.
That's right. And even Amazon uses so much late binding code, late binding decision making for all the components that come and go on their site, every few seconds. It's way too much for humans to manage. So they use, AI to make those decisions. And that's why they can track us everywhere we go after we have visited their site and looked at a product. It's almost creepy how well they do their job, and it's because of their data collection, their telemetry, and their AI capabilities at this level.
Right, exactly. So let's move on. Segue there is, if we're really in this business to outlearn the competition, right? It's not about deployment. Deployment is not the goal. We're not here to out-deploy the competition. We're out here to outlearn the competition. That means we need to know more about our customers, their behaviors, their patterns, their wants, their desires, and their needs than anybody else. That's a lot of data. So we've got to find a way to collect that data, manage the data, and learn from it.
Yeah, it's all about.
Here we are in learn.
It's all about this stuff, the whole cycle. Right?
This is what it's all about.
It's what it's all about right here. You just said the step one of being lean is to outlearn the competition. What do you do with it? Now you need to out-improve the competition. Well, this is where you learn how to do that. Every release is an opportunity to learn something and relentlessly improve on our product offerings and so forth. So it's the key coaching question here, and then I'll turn it back over to you, let you take it. What can we improve in the next release? This is where we learn it. Go.
Yeah, because we're not done. We're never done at this step, right? That's why this cycle is a loop. It's not a linear process. It's not waterfall. It's not one and done. It's not, tee it up and knock it down, right? This is a continuous learning loop. We're never finished. That first bit of work that we got out the door, that initial hypothesis, reflected a minimum viable product or a minimum marketable feature or some subset of that big idea, because we wanted to de-risk the pipeline and de-risk the whole value proposition, right? So a lot of times we're talking about big ideas that come in from the business or the customers or even the dev teams, right? Could come from anywhere. But a lot of times these ideas are big ideas, but if we haven't done it before, we have to find a way to de-risk it so that we don't bet the farm on a bad idea. We're placing bets. So let's place calculated bets. That means that what we're sending through the pipeline at any given time is a small batch. So we're going to send the first batch through the highest value thing with the highest cost of delay. We're going to get that in front of our customers. We're going to test it. We're going to gather the feedback, measure the value there, learn from it, and then we're going to decide what to do next. Are we going to continue with this idea? Are we going to pivot to something else? Are we going to stop altogether and shudder? Are we going to scuttle the idea and move on to something completely different, right? Because we're learning our way through this process. That's why we do it.
And if I could quote my learned colleague just the other day, I believe it was Friday, and let me quote you, Mark. You said, "Whoever delights their customers the best wins." End of quote. Here's where we know we've done it. By
That's
this
right.
point, we can prove it at this point. And having learned how we can further improve the product, this is where we are now feeding the backlog for the next cycle of improvements. And not just the product itself, but, what optimizations can we add to our pipeline so that we can release better next time? So it's not just the quality of the product or the functionality of the product, it's the pipeline itself. Can we eliminate one more bottleneck in the next cycle? And add that to the backlog and make sure that we are better at delivering, not just better with our product design. Each time we release, here's the opportunity to learn both the technical and the customer facing functionality.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. I think that's a great note to end on. It's all about the customer, right? We're here to delight them. After all, they're paying the bills, right? If we can't delight them, if we can't attract customers, then we may not be in business for very long. But it's not just about attracting customers. We have to retain those customers too. Getting people's attention these days is harder than it ever has before. Retaining their attention these days is harder than it ever has before. So that's why we need to learn about what makes them tick, what their wants and desires and needs are, and develop products that continually enlighten them and deliver value. So that brings us right back up to that customer, which is the only role that we have defined in this meta model, because it is the most important role. We need to have that customer in mind at all times throughout the entire flow. So we started with that customer perspective, we're ending with the customer perspective, and that completes the learning loop. And I think that completes our time box.
I think it does.
It does. Would you guys like to answer some questions?
Sure, why not?
All right, first one up on deck. What would you say about practices that employ production validation testing before making the deployed code available to end users? Is this a missed testing activity that should be part of a feature acceptance before deployment?
Well, as far as I know, even Netflix does some of their testing in production because it's too complex to do in, earlier in their pipeline. And they want to be able to test in a valid format that it precisely mimics a release environment. And so sometimes it's very difficult to do some tests outside of the actual release environment, simply because it may not be as accurate or as valid of a set of tests that you could do if you tested in production. Production in this case, release. So I like to do as much as possible testing upstream prior to getting here, and that's why decoupling production from release is such an important process, because it allows us to mimic the release environment but do it behind the veil. Nobody gets hurt if something goes wrong, but that's, we want to catch things before we actually press the button to release. But it's not always possible or feasible or, cost effective to do all our testing upstream, even though that's the best practice. In some cases, we may have to literally do it in release, but, we have to be very careful here because then our risks go up with that. Any thing you'd like to add there, Mark?
Yeah, I think this is all about production level testing. How much testing should we do in production? Is that good or bad? I think the short answer is yes, always yes. Once you move to production, you always want to do some level of validation, whether it's a little bit, could be a smoke test, could be final sanity check, right? Or it could be extensive testing. Maybe you haven't done your functional testing or acceptance testing, your final integration or end-to-end testing until this point, because you're a big web scale company and your infrastructure is uber complex, and you don't really have a suitable testing environment until you're out in the production theater. So I think it all depends on how much testing you need to do in production. The more you do, the riskier it becomes, right? So right. The more you do, the more mature your DevOps practices need to be.
Yep, that's right.
All right, moving on. This comes from Joe. Joe always asks great questions. I've always envisioned the measure and learn activities in release on demand happening more than once and feeding the hypothesis and collaborate and research activities that are part of continuous exploration. Is that a good way of thinking about these, or am I making connections where there shouldn't be any?
Well, measure and learn is 24/7. You know, the measuring is happening around the clock in the release environment. It's not a step per se, even though it looks like it's a step in the wheel. It's something that's happening continuously. We're also continuously learning on a day-to-day basis as telemetry and the data that we're gathering from our release is stacking up and being collected. It may change our opinion about the validity of our release on a day-to-day basis. Our opinion may change based on the changes in the data or the accumulation of the data in one direction or another. So, the stabilize, the measure, and the learn are all things that are happening in real time, 24/7.
Yeah, I would just underscore that point. Yeah, Dan, you hit the nail on the head. Joe, you hit the nail on the head. This is not a linear process, right? These aren't phases in the life cycle of product delivery. This is continuous everything. So it's not the case that we would release something and then measure it a little bit and then move into learn and stop measuring that thing, right?
That's right.
For as long as that product exists, we're going to be measuring and learning from it. And those learnings are going to feed back into the continuous exploration cycle. So yeah, this model is in constant motion. The continuous delivery pipeline is a perpetual motion machine, and it doesn't necessarily have a strict linear end-to-end flow. To Dan's point, there are activities happening in each of those domains constantly that produce information, produce insights, and produce artifacts that are pulled in to the pipeline at the right times when product is moving through that conveyor belt.
That's right.
So great question, Joe. Thanks for that.
So finally, I think this can easily tie up the last bit of our time here. This comes from Catherine. What are good examples of how to measure value? Where have folks made these metrics visible for their train? And who usually manages capturing and displaying these metrics? And as a dovetail to that, another Joe question is, can you give some examples of pure vanity metrics that don't have any value whatsoever?
Well, I can answer Joe's vanity metrics question pretty easily. Like some companies that are very web centric, they might say, "Oh, we got 1 million hits on our website today." That's a vanity metric. That does not mean that we earned more revenue. It simply means that we got 1 million hits to our website. That's a vanity metric. If we want to compare vanity metric to vanity metric, it simply is a metric that makes us all feel good about our website. Okay, we're generating traffic, but how many or what percentage of that traffic actually converted to revenue producing business? And if we can't answer that question, then we know that's not the right metric that we should really be caring about. We should be tracking the telemetry that follows the actual customer activities beyond simply visiting the website. What did they do? What was their experience like? Did they buy something or did they sign up for something? Did they subscribe? Whatever the conversion definition is for us, that's what we want to be tracking because that's where the money is. The money is not in the traffic itself. It's in our effect on that traffic and what their response and behavior was that we generated. Right.
Well, Joe asked the question, what are vanity metrics? So vanity metrics come from the lean startup philosophy. So I don't know if it originated there, but Eric Ries, the author of that series, popularized the concept. So if you're looking for the source of information on vanity metrics, go to Eric Ries's book, The Lean Startup, and some of the others in the series, and that just sort of produced a whole genre of related themes. But vanity metrics are those metrics that make you feel good, but don't really tell you anything useful about how your products are doing or how your customers are liking or not liking your products. One of my favorite vanity metrics of all time were the old billion served that were on the McDonald's signs outside the restaurants.
That's right.
1 billion served, 2 billion served, and now it's just billions and billions and billions. Well, does that really mean anything? It's ego, it's vanity from McDonald's standpoint. They're very proud of that metric, but it doesn't tell you anything about the quality of the food, right? If you're in business long enough, you're going to reach those kinds of numbers just naturally. So those are vanity metrics. But back to Catherine's question, I guess her other questions, which were, what are good examples of what to measure? Where have folks made these metrics visible for their train? I'm going to cut to the chase and go right to one of my favorite descriptions of a value metric that I go back to every time. There are a million things that you could potentially measure. You know, there are the pirate metrics. There are, Google's metrics. There's all kinds of different taxonomies and philosophies. Books have been written about these metrics. The Scaled Agile Framework has a recent article update on metrics that you might want to check out too. We kind of roll everything up into 3 key metrics, which are based on value or outcomes and flow and competencies. So our framework does that. But the one that I always go back to time and time again is one that I heard from Dan North at a conference a while ago. And he said, hey, I get asked this question all the time. What should I really be tracking? And he said, if there's one thing you should be tracking that all other metrics roll up to, it's lead time to thank you. So how long does it take to get a pat on the back, an attaboy, unsolicited from your key customers, stakeholders, partners, whoever you're trying to please? I think that's really what it's all about.
Yep. And sometimes thank you is just thank you. And sometimes it's thank you and here's some money.
Right. That helps.
Either way, it's thank you, right?
Both are good.
Both are good. Yep.
I think that's it for the QA piece. We've got about 2 or 3 minutes. If anybody has any last minute questions or comments, or we want to keep rolling on some of the previous topics, we've got some time.
We could be a little bit more concrete. If that's a little bit too touchy-feely, the lead time to thank you, we could talk about some metrics that are pretty popular, right? I have a little bit of a product management background, and when I was doing active product management, I went back to pirate metrics all the time. So those are the AA, depending on your model, it's either 2 A's or 3 A's, but it's AARRR: acquisition, activation, retention, revenue. There's one more R in there, but that has to do with how you're connecting with your customers. Are you drawing them in? Are your products desirable? Are they viable? Are they feasible? Are they sustainable? And this set of metrics really helps to quantify those values to give you a real objective sense of how your products are performing in the market. Yeah. So those are my favorite metrics.
Yeah, if somebody visits your site and they click away immediately, the site is not providing an experience that they want to linger on. If they don't linger, then chances are they're not going to subscribe to anything. They're not going to sign up for anything. They're not going to click a button that you want them to click that shows that they're interested. Things like that. They're not going to become a viable lead for your sales department, et cetera, et cetera. So you want to be able to track what their actual behaviors are that lead to potential business with those potential customers. So the vanity metric was that they showed up, but how long did they stay? Now we're starting to measure things that indicate value.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to add an example to that. I mean, I think it's important not only when people show up, but where they abandon, at what step do they abandon the process for your tool? I think some of the more sophisticated shopping websites I've seen is like, hey, we noticed you left during this step. What can we do to help you and, fix that to move forward? And then you can kind of claw back some of those abandoned sessions and make some money on the back end. I think it's just really smart.
Yeah, and Catherine, as far as the transparency part of your question, I believe that everyone in the organization should have access to these metrics, or at least the aggregated metrics, the roll up of them, and to the level of how are we going to make decisions for continuously improving our product as a result of these metrics. It should be totally transparent within the organization, especially to product management and your epic owners and those that drive the strategy within the organization. They need to have access to these numbers transparently so that we can not make the same mistakes every time we release, that we can be constantly improving our customer engagement model, the customer experience, so that the metrics can improve. And so everyone needs to have access, even if they aren't literally clicking on a live dashboard themselves, they are at least receiving information on every release over time so that they can see what improvements we have made, and we can track the good metrics, the metrics that mean, revenue.
Absolutely. And bring this information into your inspect and adapt events.
Yeah, exactly.
We're just about at time. We got a last minute, really quickly question. Metrics that should be used for internal development teams that are not selling, but just developing applications. I'm sure Dan would say unit test coverage and code quality are probably the two big ones that jump out. But 60 seconds to add to that one.
Yeah, well, I'll go back to our continuous integration. A defect in your product means we missed a test, at least one test. So, the key metrics that a development team needs to know are: what is the quality of our work, and can I prove it? Better yet, the coaching question I like to ask teams is, can you sleep every night after work knowing that the code you wrote is bulletproof? If you cannot say yes to that, then we're probably missing tests. And if you want happy programmers, then you want to be able to see the discipline of test first, and knowing that their code is bulletproof, resilient, and that they own the quality. They're not tossing it over a wall to a QA silo somewhere. They are owning the initial quality of that product, and then owning the pipeline that product is going to flow through. To me, that is the height of competitive software development, is focusing on the quality, because then that solves all kinds of other problems in the pipeline. It eliminates rework, it eliminates churn, it eliminates context switching, it reduces anxiety, it improves our time to market. Just about all the metrics that we care about in our DevOps disciplines and optimizations can be resolved by focusing on initial product quality. And that goes all the way back into the requirements gathering, our continuous exploration, the architecture input that's required to make that happen, all the way through the pipeline, all the way to release.
We are at time. Thank you very much, gentlemen, everyone that came today. As a reminder, everyone that registered will be getting all 4 recordings of each piece. If you've managed to miss one of those on the way, it's lots of great information in there. And do we have one last slide, Mark, on this? Do we have the final? Or is this the last one?
Might asleep at the wheel.
I think there is a slide after this.
There we go. Hey, so you've read the book. Now talk to us to hear the rest of the story. We can help. If you're interested in learning any more of these different aspects of what we talked about today, or anything along value stream management, DevSecOps, adaptive leadership, executive coaching, everything and all points in between, please send us an email at info@iconagility.com, and we're happy to answer your questions. Thanks again, everyone, for attending, and happy Tuesday. Go get some tacos. Taco Tuesday.
Taco Tuesday.
Thank you, everyone.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Thanks, Dalen. Thanks, Mark.